Hi, I'm John Kuryawa. I'm with NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. I'm here to just moderate and facilitate the discussion. You're going to hear a great presentation from Steve Raabe. If you don't know what CBSM is, it's community-based social marketing, and we've been applying CBSM techniques to prevention and cleanup of marine debris now for a while. So Steve's going to touch on some specific elements of that, including fishing gear, plastic bottles, and cigarettes. Steve is the president of OpinionWorks, LLC. It's an independent research firm based in Maryland. He founded OpinionWorks in 2001 to apply social science-based research practices to foster behavior change and constituent engagement in environmental stewardship, public health, education, and charitable giving. He measures the public's priorities and attitudes for state and local agencies from Oregon to Delaware. Active in the Mid-Atlantic marine debris effort since 2015, he's also the author of EPA's Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Index and is a principal contributor to ChesapeakeBehaviorChange.org. Since 2007, he's also been the public opinion pollster for the Baltimore Sun newspaper. He offers his social science expertise nationally to behavioral change initiatives for the Recycling Partnership, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and others, and has conducted brand awareness studies for 24 colleges and universities from coast to coast. Steve is also the founding board chair of the original Watershed Stewardship Academy in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, and I could say he's done a great job with many of the coastal programs, including Ryan Greens from Virginia, who's here, in helping us do marine debris efforts. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and his presentation is Marine Debris, Community-Based Social Marketing, and Policy Perceptions. And we're all about people this time, so not a lot of tech and data and chemistry and physics, so we'll be talking about people. Come on up, Steve.
Thank you, John. Well, so for the quantitative people in the room, we do have some nice survey data to share with you. So if you're a quantitative person, you're still in the right place. But we're going to talk about people and how people impact the work that we all do. So just very briefly, I want to tell you that I'm very nervous today. I'm very nervous because this is primary election day in Maryland, and I was published in the Baltimore Sun, as we are every time there's an election, for days on end about our polls. So this is the day when you find out how wrong you were, about polling. Polling is really broken these days, as we all kind of know. And so, a person like me and all the work that we do, we're collecting data. We're collecting social science-based data. We're asking people their opinions, their perceptions, their attitudes about things. And so, how do you do that well? And as people stopped answering their phones about 5 or so years ago, we had to morph our methodologies. And so, what I'm going to share with you today is today's best practice. We do the best we can every time that we go into the field, and I will share that with you. But the bottom line is that I formed this firm about 20 years ago, and the impetus for that was that I was driving around the Washington Beltway to work in Bethesda every day from Annapolis, and I was worried about my carbon footprint, and I was working for firms, commercial firms I didn't care about, and my wife said, you should try to form your own thing and work on things you care about. So today I work on public health, I work on environmental issues, I work with you on marine debris. It's wonderful. It's great. And so I'm just delighted to be with all of you here today to share this good work. John mentioned ChesapeakeBehaviorChange.org. This is a website that is owned by the Chesapeake Bay program. It does a really good job of giving you a primer on this concept of community-based social marketing that I'm going to talk about today. And I would encourage you, it's not just for folks that are working on Chesapeake Bay issues. If you're working in any way around behavior change or public outreach, you're trying to reach and engage people to maybe nudge behavior or nudge attitudes, this is a good resource for you to have. Some of you may be familiar with the balloon release work that Marco has been engaged with, was engaged with, and in some ways still is engaged with over these past few years. And so the methodologies that I'm sharing with you today helped inform that work as well, and has resulted in some really good outreach tools, as you probably know, including preventballoonlitter.org, which gives a lot of good resources. So, there's two tools, two main categories of tools that I'm going to talk about here briefly today. One is quantitative, and we all know what that means. We're going to do a survey, which today I'm going to share one just completed. It's about measurement. It's about finding out where the public is and counting people, counting attitudes. What do people perceive? What do they believe? What are they willing to act upon? What policy do they support or oppose? So that's what we do in the quantitative realm, and that's the majority of what I have to share with you today. But there's also the exciting qualitative realm, and the qualitative realm is much more squishy. It's where you get people together. It can be done in person, it can be done by Zoom, but you get people together in groups usually, and you pose questions that are deep, that are meant to reach an emotional level, a perceptive level. As humans, we think that we make decisions based upon information. We think that we weigh facts. But really, the base of most of our decision-making is emotional and perceptive. We think about facts, we think about data. And I dare say that people in this room are probably much more data-oriented than the average person, so you probably do a better job of this than most humans do. But I think most of us think about the big decisions you've made. Tomorrow is my 25th wedding anniversary, as it happens, and so there's a big decision that my wife and I made 25 years ago. Buying a house, buying your car, a lot of these decisions that we think are intellectual are really emotional, and you can scale that down from getting married and buying a house and buying a car to stuff that's much more mundane, like what brands you buy when you go to the grocery store, or how you behave, with regard to what you do with your cigarette butt and why. And so the qualitative method is designed to get after all of that. It's designed to help get inside people's thought process. And so we put people together in groups that are very affirmative, groups that are very homogeneous in terms of outlook and perspective and background, so that as people start to talk with each other in these groups, they resonate. They realize that the other people that are there have similar ideas. And this is a way in which you get people to be uninhibited, to talk honestly, because really we want to understand what's on people's minds. And so if we're going to nudge behavior, we need to know what the real barriers are. We need to know what really is going on with people. And so this method does a great job of that. So I want to ask you, how many of you have been introduced to this idea of community-based social marketing? Is this, just by a show of hands, how many feel like you've kind of been introduced to it or have some familiarity with it? Maybe about half, it sounds like. Of those of you, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, don't worry, I won't ask anybody any questions, but of those of you that said yes, how many feel confident? Like, I know what that is. I know how to employ it. Jess does. Yeah, just a small handful. We're shaky. Yeah, so let's talk about it for just a couple of minutes. I won't go deep, but I want to just introduce the basic idea. So we all recognize this curve. Credit goes to Everett Rogers, who's highlighted here in yellow. In the mid-20th century, he was a well-known social scientist and developed this diffusion of innovations curve that's on the screen. It was his theory that we all have personality types. This is really a personality curve. And so he's, talking about people here on the left who are innovators and early adopters, and then people in the middle who are following along, but that's where most people are. They're behind that leading edge. And then there's folks over at the right-hand side of this curve who he called laggards. I call them resistant, which is a little bit friendlier, but people who don't want to do these things. And so we have to sort of beat them over the head if they're going to come along with us. Well, this principle, we can think about it with regard to technology. Technology adoption is a way that we often think about this, but that can be applied to other disciplines. It can be applied to behavior when it comes to marine debris. This same principle applies. So additional credit goes to Nancy Lee, who is a present-day social scientist out in the Puget Sound region, who took the Everett Rogers curve and did a little overlay that I'm sharing with you. And very cleverly, I mean, she calls these people on the left show-me's, because all you got to do is show me what to do and I will do it. You know, you don't need anything but information, like install a rain barrel. Okay, where do I get one? You know, that kind of thing. And so you can think about those people, who they are, and guess what? That gets you about 16% of the curve, according to Everett Rogers. And at the other end of the curve, Nancy calls those people make-me's. You're going to have to make me do it because I am not going to do it otherwise. In the middle is everybody else, which is most people. Most people in society are in this, quote, help me group. And so the idea of the help me group is that information alone is not enough. You can't talk your way into getting people to act. If there's some barriers in front of them, you have to help them a little bit. And that's the basic theory of community-based social marketing and other related disciplines that use, you might have heard of the nudge theory or behavioral economics. I mean, these are all sort of similar ideas in a family that are all about nudging human behavior forward. So the blue curve that overlays the yellow describes the traditional approach. So on the left, there's a lot of energy traditionally invested in information. We do public education. You know, we put out websites and brochures, we go to community meetings and we talk. That's a big part of what we do. We publish papers. You know, I mean, that is a big part of our community and part of what we do, and it's important. But it only really reaches people on that left side of the curve in terms of actually changing anything. It introduces ideas, it gets people thinking, but in terms of the actual behavioral nudge and change that you're going for, it only accomplishes so much. On the other end of the curve is the compulsory stuff that we do, where our society invests enormous resources in doing things like fining people and suing and making laws and enforcing those laws. Think about it, you know, and those are all designed to reach the people and institutions that are not compliant, that are make-me's. So who does that leave out? It's all those well-intentioned people in the middle of the curve. And this is true, I mean, this is true across almost any kind of a behavioral question that you can name. So John talked about our 3 behaviors that we're looking at in this project, one of which is the use of disposable plastic water bottles, or the use of refillable water bottles, better, right? Also the disposal of cigarette butts and maybe vape cartridges inappropriately, as well as derelict fishing gear. And so those are the 3 behaviors that we're looking at under the current project. All 3 of them have this kind of a phenomenon going for them. And you're going to see that in the quantitative data in just a minute, how that works. I want to give you an example of what a behavioral nudge looks like in real practice. This is something that I was involved with in the city of Cincinnati, Ohio. They were doing an experiment in their recycling program with giving people these little in-home recycling bins. Typically, people make their recycling decisions in the kitchen. That's the room where most people, most families, most households decide what goes in the trash, what goes in the recycling. So this little bin goes in your kitchen somewhere. And we were measuring this both qualitatively through focus groups to figure out what people wanted and how they would respond to it, but also quantitatively, pre and post. And it's magnificent, the difference that this little bin makes for reasons that I could describe. But just giving people this little in-home bin organizes the recycling process inside the house. It reminds people that they should be recycling. Not just residents, but guests of the family know it's important and they should probably throw stuff in there. It increases recycling participation and capture rates significantly by a gross, statistically significant margin. So it's a very effective tool and it's very simple. So this is the kind of a thing that we always look for. What are the tools, what are the incentives, what are the prompts that we can give the public that will get them to act? So on our behaviors, what are they? If you want to know more about this community-based social marketing idea in a very simple format, Under ChesapeakeBehaviorChange.org, there's a Behavior Change tab at the top of the screen. And if you click into that, you'll come to this 6-part primer that you can visit. You can click on any one of the 6 steps of the process and see resources and advice of how to do this simply. So those of you, again, that are trying to reach and engage the public, I would recommend this as a way to just easily understand and apply this particular social science. So here today, and oh, by the way, I want you to interrupt with questions when they come up, and then John will have some questions for you too. The methodology that we're going to discuss today, this just completed survey, consists of 2,294 interviews across the 5 states in the Marco region. So that's a good sample size. Those of you that do any survey research know that that's a good solid sample that we can segment. You know, you can both have high confidence in the region-wide findings. It was designed in a stratified way so we can look at each of the 5 states with confidence. And then you can segment, so you can look within the overall sample at different groups and population subgroups, behavioral subgroups, attitudinal subgroups, and so it helps us figure out who out there in the public is really most prone to respond to whatever we're going to do in this campaign. We're also measuring some policy preferences here, and I'm just going to show you one slide, I think, on policy, but the news is good in terms of what the public wants to support in our realm. The public is generally with us. Legislators don't always believe that, and legislators are hearing from people that don't want to see some of these reforms pass. So consequently, there's inertia, but the public will is pretty strong behind a lot of these policy measures that we measured. There's qualitative work to come. We're about to do the focus groups, and so I want to engage in a little conversation with all of you today about that and about what would interest you in that work. So let's start here. I just want to give you a few big headlines out of this survey so that you have a couple thoughts about where the public is on the issues that we care about. First, let's look at context. So this is a question that I really like, where we ask people just to rate how serious they think certain problems are. I see that my arrows moved a little bit, Jess. That's okay. I can narrate. I don't know what happened, but in the transmission of our files this morning, a couple things probably got messed up. Yes, they did. Well, anyway, that's okay. It's my fault. I should have sent you a PDF or something, but it's okay. I will narrate. So the yellow, or the red rather, the red is very serious. We gave them a 4-part scale, and very serious is the top point on that scale. And then the yellow or orange is somewhat serious, and then there's 2 other points on that scale. But we're just showing you the top 2 points, because these are people that consider these things to be problems. So the number 1 issue, tied, it's a dual thing. The first 2 items both get 90% problem ratings from the public. Inflation and the cost of living is the second one that you see, and the one that's partially blocked by an arrow is plastics in the environment. Now, that's amazing. Is anybody surprised to see plastics in the environment as the number 1 issue of concern in the public, tied with inflation? Yes. Surprise. I mean, it is a surprise. It's amazing, and I can tell you from when we're doing work on air quality, certainly on recycling, on water quality issues, plastics always comes up in focus groups. People are bringing it up. There's a tremendous appetite in the public, a worry about plastic, and a big appetite to do something about it. Now, the public's conflicted. You're about to see that in some of the data, but there's a will to do something. And so that's our opening with the public. Then you have crime in number 2 position. A lot of people are concerned about that these days, tied with chemicals and other toxins in the environment. Again, the public has deep concern about some of these issues that we're working on. Unsafe, I actually don't remember what that was. Drinking water, thank you. Unsafe drinking water, also very high, and plastics contaminating human food. So those are both scoring at 81%. Climate change is below all of that. And immigration, which is a hot button in the political world, is below that. Trash and litter in your community, interestingly, and this was consistent on the Virginia survey that preceded this by a couple of years, at the bottom of the list, of this list, compared to plastics in the environment more generally, and particularly floating plastics being of great concern to the public. It's just a greater concern. And when you ask people about that, it has to do with the ecosystem that they understand exists in the water. You know, people aren't scientists, but they sort of get that there's something going on, that there's an interrelationship in a body of water, and that's very concerning to people. So the level of worry about plastics, and again, I'll just apologize for any formatting craziness that you see, but the worry about plastics in the environment, people worry often or sometimes at a level of 80%. So 4 out of 5 people are worrying about this, worrying about it, thinking about it. There's links to human health. I mean, people are very concerned about what they're consuming. They're very concerned about microfibers and other things that they might be breathing in. They don't know what's out there. And so the public is thinking about this. This is a rare thing, to be honest with you. I mean, for an environmental issue to be this penetrated into the public consciousness is unique, and it's terrible, but it's also a great opportunity for us to connect with the public around this and to propose solutions. So let's look at some bottled water behavioral issues and see how the public's doing on this. First, how often are people drinking bottled water from disposable plastic water bottles? 75% offer sometimes. What's making you laugh?
I'm laughing because it's just, I mean, I think people call it value action gap, they call it, I mean, whatever it's called. I mean, so many people are worried about plastic, and yet so many people drink from plastic water bottles.
Exactly, right? That's the gap. That's the gap. So what is that? Is it a lagging indicator? Is it like, okay, I'm really worried about it, but it's so convenient to have this disposable water bottle? Or is it hypocrisy? Or is it just not making the connections? Is it, rationalization? Gee, I think maybe I'm sure that the Dasani bottle is completely safe because they wouldn't sell those bottles if they weren't safe. The FDA is looking out for us after all, So is that it? We'll find out, when we get into these focus groups. That's exactly the type of thing that is so intriguing. When you move from quantitative to qualitative, you're faced with that kind of a disconnect. It's like, well, okay, so why is this the number one worry on people's minds, and yet they're doing this? What's that about? And so we actually find a very friendly way to kind of make people grapple with a paradox like this and explain it to us. And so it's entertaining to me. I mean, honestly, I pick people out of the survey sample to go into the focus groups because they express contradictions just like this. And so that's exactly what you want to hear about. Are they struggling with that? Sometimes people are. Are they oblivious? Sometimes they are. And then if that's what it is, what kind of information and nudges and other things can we present to kind of move things along the scale with people? So that, in a nutshell, is kind of what we look for in the data. The trend in use of disposable water bottles, the red is increased, and that beautiful limey green color the color's also changed a little in the transmission of the deck. So that green color is decreased. So actually right now, according to what we see in the regional sample, as many people are decreasing their water bottle usage as increasing. So there's a bell curve thing, and we don't know much about that yet without looking more deeply at the data to see kind of who they are. Who are the people over here? Who are the people over there? What's different about them? We have some hypotheses in the little working group. For example, people with families who are taking their kids around to sporting events and stuff. Maybe some of them are in the increased group because life is complicated. We don't know, and so we're going to be pursuing some of those avenues. Tap water is a big, yes, go ahead.
So one way to square the contradiction you were talking about would be that people are using plastic water bottles and throwing them away and don't think they're ending up in the Pacific Gyre they think they're going to a landfill. I kind of think mine usually go to a landfill, but is that?
Sure, yeah, people might think that they're getting recycled or going to the landfill, and that's okay. with them. So yeah, it could be that, right? And they may not be contemplating any of the health issues. I truly think, this is my hypothesis, that people are not embracing the health concern. They're not thinking about the danger of the plastic water bottle on their health.
If you'd ask people, like, how concerned are you about plastic going to landfills? I think you'd get a much lower response of concern.
Probably lower than in the ocean. But it's still, I mean, I do a lot of work on recycling, as I said, and the concern about landfills is pretty high. I mean, but it's not as high as this. You're right.
Is there any kind of bounding on what sometimes means? Because I think that's part of the issue here too. Is sometimes we live in a society that
Yeah.
is structured around plastic water bottles being available at a convenience. So there's going to be some time over this next year that I may drink through a plastic water bottle. Very rarely, I always bring
Right.
something everywhere I go. So
Right.
kind of like the climate change. Are you concerned about climate change? But yet you're driving a car every day to work. How do you avoid it? With the society structure to support that? Oh.
Basically, I asked you, well, what is the bounding around sometimes? Did you define that at all? Is that once a year? Is that
Yeah.
once a month? Several times a month?
So sometimes we define that in that way with an actual scale of time, time posts, and sometimes we don't. The sometimes the sometimes we do and the sometimes we don't have to do with what we're trying to accomplish with a question like this, or like whichever one you're thinking of. This one probably, and sometimes I keep using that word, but I can't avoid it. You are more concerned with people's perception of how engaged they are with an activity. And you're right, sometimes maybe a little too broad, and we may need to have another point on that scale. Although I dare say that you would put yourself in the seldom category on this particular scale.
I'd like to think so. But again, sometimes you end up in a place where you're like, oh gosh, I don't have water. There's a plastic
Yeah.
bottle. They're giving them out for free at the hotel
Right.
or something. It just happens.
And that's exactly, when that happens, that's exactly when you see your colleague from the Marine Debris Work Group, right? Yeah. I don't do this all the time, I swear.
To your point, maybe seldom is actually where folks like that should be.
Yeah. I mean, scales can always be improved, but that's kind of what we're seeking to do. And so we hope that people who really don't use them very often are putting themselves in the seldom category, but I don't know, yeah.
On a previous slide, you were showing how people are concerned about plastics in the environment, but then trash and litter in the environment was much lower. Are people not considering plastic trash and litter?
Well, I mean, it's really interesting. Number one, it says trash and litter in your community. So there is that. I mean, there are certainly people who believe that there's trash in some neighborhoods, but maybe not mine, So there's that. But also, in our work with litterers, people that are frequently throwing stuff on the ground, which is also obviously very interesting work to kind of understand motivations around that. It is clear from the litterers that we've interviewed over the years that throwing stuff on the ground is much less impactful in their eyes than throwing it in the water. There's something about when things go in the water, it degrades faster. Again, it floats around and it gets nasty. And when we've shown pictures of trash in the woods or trash in a public park or even trash on a playground, but compared to floating trash, it's almost always less impactful on people. It's very interesting. So water is evocative. Water is a very important ingredient in this whole thing. And given who you are as the Marine Debris Work Group, I think that's important to us to know that and to work with that. I mean, I think that that's an advantage that we have. Water as the basic building block of life, and that's how people do think about it. Precious. And so when stuff gets in it, that's a concern. Always ask your questions. Don't ever hesitate, even if I'm rolling, don't hesitate to jump in. So rating your tap water, I want to assert the thought that it's not the only factor by far, but one of the factors driving bottled water usage is people's attitudes about their tap water. And tap water attitudes have to do with whether people think their tap water is healthy or not. Maybe it's contaminated, or they think it's contaminated. But also there's the issue of taste and smell, which comes up a lot when you ask people about it. And so we asked them here to grade their tap water for clean and healthy on this scale of excellent, good, fair, poor. Now, subjective, right? It's a subjective scale, and we don't know. I mean, are these people reading the reports that come from their municipal water authority to tell them, what's really in the water? Probably not, but it's perception. And their perception of their tap water, whether real or just perception, really drives behavior. And you can see that in this little box. People who rate their tap water poor on either of these two things are half again as likely to drink bottled water often. So it's not the only factor, but it's a big factor. Here's another factor. Half again. So it's 18 to 20 points more likely, which makes it about 50% more likely when you consider the base. It's not quite double, but it's close. But this is also a factor. Where are people drinking their disposable water bottled water more often? So we asked them to use this sliding scale from zero, which is I always drink it, only drink it at home, to 10, which is I only drink bottled water when I'm away from home. And 5 is, it's about 50-50. So on this scale, the median is at 63. So in other words, they're drinking bottled water more frequently away from home. There's more bottled water drinking going on outside the home, though a fair amount at home, as you see on the right-hand side. But that line represents the median, and that is, at 63. So there's a little bit of weight on the, which side? On the away-from-home side of this scale. So what does that mean? Maybe convenience is an issue for a lot of people, right? Do you take your refillable water bottle with you? 70% liars. 70% say. So did I say that? Out loud? 70% say often or sometimes. Again, sometimes, right? That sometimes word. There it is. So if we took sometimes apart, and if we take often apart, maybe a person's taking the water bottle every Saturday, and they're like, that's often. So it is a perception, and this is their attitude. The point from a social science standpoint, though, I mean, we're not trying, remember, everything we're doing in a survey like this is meant to inform what comes next. And what comes next is both a qualitative research round, so we're looking for questions we need to have better answers to here, but also there's the behavior change intervention. And so what drives behavior change? It's human perception. It's not the fact that I carry a water bottle every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's that I think that's often, or I think that's only sometimes and I could do better. And so it's the intention, it's the perception and attitude of the person that you're trying to change. It's what they think. So if they think it's often and often means something to them, then that's what we work with. And so everything is geared in that direction, if that makes sense, to try to understand the mindset and the propensities. So do we believe them? It's my little inset box. Maybe, but it's probably a little overrepresented, don't you think? And then, if they're carrying that refillable water bottle around so much, then why are they using all those disposable water bottles? That's my question. So we asked them in an open-ended way, and this is, again, a preview of a focus group type question, but what would make you more likely to take a refillable water bottle with you when you're away from home? These are the 4 major themes that we heard in this open-ended question. If I'm out with a refillable water bottle, I need to know that I'm going to be able to have access to some refillable water bottle stations, places where I can get good, clean, maybe filtered water, fresh water. Some people want a different kind of a bottle than what they've had, or they just want to know that it's going to be convenient to carry it because it's a little bit of a headache, let's be honest. I mean, this one's made of glass. It's my favorite one, but it's heavy, and so it's a little bit of a pain. Are you willing to admit that? I mean, it's a little bit of a pain. A lot of times what we ask the public to do is painful. It's a little pain, there's a little pain point, or there's, maybe it costs them a little money, or, it's inconvenient slightly. So, yeah, well, maybe, not a major one, but yes, I'm sure it's there. Or they don't perceive that they need to, that they need to rehydrate that often, and they forget it. Having water refill stations would have a big impact. So here's the happy news for the Marco team who's working on this. If there were water refill stations, and oh, by the way, if people knew where they were, then it looks like it would have a really big impact on this behavior. And John, I'm going to stop because I realize I'm running long, and maybe we should engage in some of our conversation after this slide, right? Is it truly 11:42? Yeah, so I'm going to pause after this slide. I do have some cigarette butt and some fishing gear numbers, but much fewer. But I want to give a chance for a little dialogue here. So I'm going to pause in this presentation, only to leave you with this thought, that 2/3 of the public across the 5-state region would support a 10-cent bottle deposit bill. I mean, the beverage industry will tell you that that is completely wrong. I've measured this in different states over and over again. It's always like this. I mean, 2/3 of the public would like to have this law. I mean, part of it is that you get the money back. I mean, that's persuasive and helpful. But even so, just the impact on better collection and the ability to know that the bottle's probably going to go where it needs to go to get reused ultimately, recycled and reused, is extremely persuasive with the public. So there's support for this. I mean, I would love to see legislation get legs because the public would be behind it. So I'll stop here and let's just engage in some conversation.
Sure. Is this on, I hope? Awesome. So we're in the help me phase. We're hoping that you all can provide some ideas, or if you have experience in either mitigating marine debris or other public engagement efforts that have had success or perhaps failure, we want to know about those. So I'm starting with the bottom line up top. Marco is interested in hearing from university students, community members, planners, folks who have been engaged in activities like, for example, this water refill station to prevent the use of single-use bottles. So first question is, does anybody have examples like that? Is anybody engaged? Yes.
Yeah, so as a university student, water bottles are very big. The Stanley Cup is huge. But I actually think that refillable coffee is, like, being able to fill up coffee is a way bigger, is not working, my bad, is a way bigger issue than filling up the water bottles, because I feel like all university students want to fill up their water bottles, but coffee, iced coffee specifically, because they are obsessed with iced coffee, is more of a problem, especially since the pandemic. I felt like before the pandemic, when I was in undergrad, people were asking people like the Starbucks to fill up their cup, but then the pandemic happened and that completely stopped. So more effort in being able to fill up your own cup would probably be helpful, especially with the increase in mobile ordering. It's hard to get them to fill up the cup first, so maybe more. I don't know how much the Marco can help, but that's what I've noticed is the biggest issue. I bring this every day. I've never forgotten it. But I can't drink this and fit it in my bag and a coffee case. So I think my biggest problem is my biggest contributor to plastic is definitely iced coffee. So I want help.
And a follow-up? Devin behind it.
Switch the topic, but if you had a reply first for her.
No, I have no reply. I think that's a great comment, and it's an example of kind of listening to the audience, and maybe the university audience needs refillable coffee cups And of course, I'll drop this little thought in, is that, of course, in our social science context, we do think about downstream, midstream, and upstream audiences. And in your case, you may have both a midstream and an upstream audience to think about. Who's purveying coffee on the campus, and how are they selling it, and are they welcoming of refillable coffee containers? Or could you, at an upstream level, get the university-wide to put a ban on disposable coffee cups, which would force the issue? So anyway, those are just some thoughts, but great comment.
A follow-up on that is, as a non-university person, I have issues with that too. It's the iced coffee and not being able to bring both. I mean, I tried to, but if you're out and you're tired, I go get an iced coffee and it's plastic every time. So it might be bigger than just university.
Okay.
There's no doubt about your point about the pandemic having influenced this, because I rarely get coffee out, but I always have my cup with me. And there are a lot of places now that are like, no, we don't think so. That's not happy here. And then same applies if you go to the same luncheon place. I've often asked, hey, can I bring a plastic, or can I bring my own plastic or a glass container for the Chinese food or whatever? And they just give you a dirty look, like, no, we're not gonna patronize that here. So we had a question in the back.
Yeah, so I had a couple questions. So for my first one is, how fine are you tracking your plastics in a scale, like from bleach bottles up down to which fine particulate size unit?
You mean in this work?
Yeah.
Not very finely at all, but in the recycling work that we do, it's excruciatingly and unfortunately very fine. So in that world, when you're trying to divert plastics and other materials into some sort of a reuse stream, there's a lot of attention towards composition, and then how do you get the public to understand the difference between plastic A and B and C, some of which are accepted and not accepted in the local recycling program. So that's where it becomes extremely important to think about. And then you have to think about how to communicate that well to the public so that they can act accordingly and place the plastic in the right stream. But here, we're approaching this a little more broadly, and so we're not refining it like that.
Okay. I am a student, a graduate student. If my topic wasn't what I'm doing now, which is blue crabs, I would be studying microplastics. And so that was to start up this conversation, was how fine are you doing your plastics? One of my ideas was using sonicating, which is like airwaves, and using it to break down microplastics. But then even if you break down microplastics, then you have nanoplastics. And then that's even more, to an extent, worse. And so that was just one of my ideas in terms of a project that I wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. You can think about climate change, too, in this context, which is there's people that have these ideas of putting things up in the atmosphere to reflect, this will magically make climate change go away. I don't know how I feel about that kind of science. Your science that you're talking about also has some ethical and things to think about if you're going to take microplastics and turn them into nanoplastics, but maybe it still is worth pursuing. But in terms of the public, in terms of working with the public, I think that that's the sort of an effort that goes on, but it's not helpful. I'm going to be very brazen about saying this. I think it's not helpful to communicate false hope or hope to the public about things like that could just magically solve in a scientific way the problem of microplastics. What we want to do, even if it works, we want to get the public engaged and stopping the problem of plastics in the water supply at the source by using less. And so to engage people, we have to dwell in the reality that there's a big problem and it's very difficult to solve. And so sometimes solutions that are science-based or futuristic can dampen the motivation in the public to really get engaged with it. So that is always my concern about things like that, even though they are very promising. Does that make sense? And I'm not undermining what you're trying to accomplish, which I think is important.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
That's actually a perspective I never really considered, in terms of just putting a cover over it and saying science handles it now. What about the social
Yeah.
aspect? But I did have one more question about one of your first slides where it was concerns and we had like a hierarchy of
Yeah.
percentages. Is that, so I missed the beginning of your portion, like the first 5 minutes, so I might have missed it. But those, can you go back to that slide if you can?
Oh, sure, yeah. It'll take me a second, but I'll get there.
While Steve's getting there, we were going to touch upon derelict fishing gear and disposal of cigarette butts. So one question, and I'm going to pose as we're wrapping up, is what other marine debris issues or other environmental issues, pollution issues, might community-based social marketing be successfully applied to? And Steve also mentioned that we have had some success on reducing balloon litter and encouraging people to take other actions to celebrate a birthday or have a memorial service that doesn't include release of balloons. So just put your thinking caps on. Are there other marine debris issues out there that might benefit from these approaches, or are there other issues in general that'll benefit the ocean in some way?
Go ahead.
Is this slide that I'm looking at right now, is this just a generic concerns or is this tied in to certain pollution? Like general concerns or, I don't know, I don't really know how to word this, but
Well,
are these connected to statistics of pollution?
yeah. So when we ask the question, it's very straightforward, and it's what you see at the bottom of the screen. Do you consider each of the following to be, and then we read the scale to them, and it randomizes this list, so it's asked in a different order each time to each person, but in the list are some environmental things and some non-environmental things. I mean, there's things that, like crime and inflation and immigration, that are not environmentally related. So the goal here is to understand how, we know that inflation is a big concern of the public. There's lots of data about that that's out there, polling data. So we're trying to benchmark against some of those real hot button concerns. And so it's not necessary, it's only, environmental for the ones that are environmental, but the rest of them are not. And so we're just trying to put these environmental questions in that context.
I'm glad you said that, just because as a minority, I was going to ask you to correlate how did immigration connect
Yeah.
to that, but I'm glad you said that.
Well, because we know that it's on the minds of many Americans, for good or ill, and so knowing that it's a thing that people always say when you ask, like on my Baltimore Sun poll, where we ask people what's the most important issue you'd like the president and the next Congress to work on, and there's a lot of people that say illegal immigration, that's their thing. So knowing that that's out there, we just wanted to benchmark against that and some other things like inflation, just to kind of see where these environmental issues fall and how big of a concern they are. And guess what? Our elected officials don't talk about the plastics in the environment at nearly the same level that they talk about the border or they talk about cost of living. So, interesting, right?
Just going back to what you were saying earlier, I guess for like leftover fishing gear, I am not sure whatsoever how to engage that middle group of the bell curve, because I feel like if you see the picture of the turtle with all of it on it, I don't know what's going to convince people in the middle. So I guess I wanted to engage discussion about that. I want to know what other people think about that.
Thoughts on that one? As someone who fishes a lot, I agree that it's difficult to sort of figure out. I mean, I would never leave any discarded fishing gear. However, you do lose gear as a fisherman, and sometimes, even after your best efforts, it's unavoidable that line and your lures wind up in the water. But there are, and the survey results revealed, if Steve had gotten to them, there are communities of people who think nothing of leaving their bait, their line, their old hooks, riverside, or just throwing them in the river. And so I mean, one question would be, how do we sort of engage that community and reach them in an effective way to sort of, try to have them start thinking about the fact that this is detrimental and there may be better ways to dispose of it.
And it's not, yeah. It's not just that. I guess I'm also referring to, I think I read a statistic that 20% of the plastic comes from commercial fisheries. So how to influence the public to not want that to happen in the ocean, because I feel like we might have more control over our own like fishing gear, but what about fishing gear that we don't have control over? How do we influence that?
So can I ask a question? I've kind of been in line for a little bit for questions, and it's not specific to derelict fishing gear, but as a policy person, as a policy advocate who works on plastic pollution policy, climate policy, wildlife and habitat policy, Maggie from National Aquarium, aquariums are very involved in educating the public about the problem of plastic pollution broadly, and how they can get involved. I do want to have a chance to ask in the focus group environment, because it is helpful to see that there is a high level of concern for the plastic problem, the plastic crisis. I'm curious if you're already, or if you might consider in focus groups, exploring people's understanding of a couple things. The scale of the issue. I mean, how much do people understand that the amount of plastic is going to triple, maybe double, but triple production in the next couple of years, right? How much do people understand that by and large, there's, it's important, it's a piece of the equation, but by and large, individual behavior and individual actions are not going to address the scale of that problem. So there needs to be some level of policy and incentives and, frankly, holding the industry accountable, right? And so I think trying to figure out how much people understand, what people think about, bottle deposits is one example of holding, producers of the plastic accountable to some degree. And so, scale of the issue, what people think about holding the industry accountable for all of the stuff that it makes, a lot of it single use and packaging. And then, to what degree people understand how much plastic production and the whole supply chain is connected to climate change. And to what degree people are thinking about the fact that every aspect of that plastic supply chain falls the hardest on communities that are already experiencing the first and worst, right? So from the making of the plastic all the way through to the recycling of the plastic, the toxins and chemicals fall the hardest on frontline and fence-line communities. So I'd be interested in what the public's understanding are of those issues and how that might motivate them to more support policy change so that more lawmakers can understand that the public does actually care and the industry is usually wrong.
Yeah, and this is great, and thank you for raising that. I mean, your timing is perfect because we're just now planning the focus groups, so it's perfect. We might want to reach out to you because one of the things that is impactful in a focus group is presenting people with, your little factoid, which I know you tossed off casually, and there's probably hard data behind it, but there will be a tripling of plastic production in the next X years. That sort of a thing makes people's eyes pop out of their heads. And so we want to understand the impact of facts like that and that chain that you just presented to us. Where along that continuum do people get engaged and disengaged? And then once they do, how motivating is that for people, and are they willing to take some action? I'm working right now in the Ohio River Basin for National Wildlife Federation looking at clean water issues, because what they're trying to get there is what we have in the Chesapeake Bay, which is an agreement and congressional funding and kind of, a lot of concerted action, getting agencies to talk to each other. They don't have that. And the public in focus groups there is completely locked in. They're like, that is great. We need that here. Our water stinks. We've got to have some, it's a right that we are being denied. It's amazing to me that we've never harnessed that energy that exists out there, because the rivers in the Ohio Basin are pretty dirty and there's a lot of motivation in the public. So that's what we look for, is what is the switch that goes on for people that hasn't gone on when you present certain kinds of information. And then that is the key for our advocacy efforts, if we can figure out what that is. So we should talk some more.
This is, super interesting.
Good.
Well, let's give Steve a hand. Thank you so much, Steve, for